An update on two of the 2024 NHL Draft's big wingers, updates as well on some Russian prospects, and we're going to do another segment of Game on the Line with the 2021 NHL Draft, all coming up on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi joined by Sebastian. Hi. We've got a packed episode for you today. We're going to start off with an update on two of the 2024 NHL Draft's big right wingers, Emil Hemming and Michael Brandsegg-Nygård. We'll look at their games and an update on one of the recent games here and how they fared. Then in our second segment, we'll look at some Russian prospects. So listeners sent in some questions about a couple Russian prospects asking for updates and what's going on their side. So we'll go into that. And then finally, we'll go to Game on the Line for a final segment. We'll look at the 2021 NHL Draft, select one player from each round, 6 players out of the 7th rounds, essentially, and build a starting 6 for a game 7 Stanley Cup final overtime game, just to win a game of that sort. So before we get into it, I just want to let you know this episode is sponsored by Jace Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jace case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics to treat 50 plus infections. Get yours today at jacemedical.com. Again, that's JASE medical.com. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So, Sebastian, you've recently watched 2 games from 2 big wingers for the 2024 NHL Draft. First, how's the 24 draft in terms of size on the wing? Essentially, I feel like this is a particular year that's jam-packed at that position. We've got Emil Hemming, who we're going to talk about, Michael Brandsegg-Nygård, who we're going to talk about. I think Igor Chernyshov as well was in that conversation. So how's it looking for the 2024 NHL Draft for a team that's looking to add size on the wing?
Oh, for sure. There's quite a few options in here. And I think Emil Hemming and Michael Brandsegg-Nygård are 2 of my favorites in that mold. Both are players that are likely going to be playing a lot of pro minutes this season. Brandsegg-Nygård already has been starting that way. He's been playing the preseason games in the Allsvenskan with more IK and has been playing pretty big minutes on a second line pretty much for most of those games. And he is a great forechecker. Like, there's a reason that he's won his coach's trust so quickly. He is a very reliable defensive player. He's constantly applying pressure off puck. And while there's a lot of skill there, as his J20 production can show, I think he's played 2 games in the J20 this season, and he has like 7 points or something.
Yeah,
like, it's
too good for that.
Stupid.
Yeah.
But the reason that he's sticking it in the pros is because he's such a high-end defensive player. Now, the offensive game, interestingly, is the one thing that hasn't fully translated just yet. He always expects to have a little bit more time and space than he does. It's just part of adapting to that professional setting. But that's one thing that we're going to have to keep an eye on, just to kind of see how that offensive game progresses, while the defensive game is already very, very impressive. I mean, this is one of the best forecheckers, like U20 forecheckers in Sweden already. And he's, again, in the defensive zone. He knows his assignments very, very well. He switches assignments fluidly. He drops very low into the defensive zone to support his defensemen. He has all the defensive professional habits there that are great. Offensively, he needs to work a bit on his scanning in my viewings, and again, kind of just upping that pace a bit, which is quite a similar critique that I have of Emil Hemming, who his defensive game isn't at the same level, though I think he's quite a good back checker. I think he caused a lot of turnovers in the offensive and neutral zones, at the very least against junior competition. He likes to kind of like just lift a stick from in behind a player and just quickly get the puck going back the other way. He's a master of the counterattack, and he's a very impressive rush scorer. And I think that his goal scoring tools are probably a bit more impressive than MBN's are. And he is a very instinctive goal scorer. He's constantly buzzing around the slot. He's constantly staying in motion, trying to access space. He likes to prod defensive structures, try to create holes. He's very, very fun, but the consistency of his pace is still a bit of an issue in my eyes. And he has a pretty strong foundation of things, but I think one aspect that I'm a little bit concerned about, at least to start the season, is that he relies on his like really superior physicality and impressive speed to kind of just like be that elite rush creator against junior competition, and that will not translate to the professional game. Like he is quick and he is powerful, but not to the level of being able to play the same style that he is playing right now against better competition. But yeah, these are both players with a couple key things in their games that need attention, both in the short and long runs. But both of these players are really fun, very intelligent, and are quite gifted and have some really intriguing tools too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you look at Michael Brandsegg-Nygård, I mean, in the tape that I've watched of him, it's always been the type of player that you can see him develop into a checking winger. You can see a clear pathway to the NHL. I'm not as confident with that pathway when it comes to Emil Hemming. There are some lackings in his game that make me wonder how he's going to adapt to the next level. I think that Brandsegg-Nygård sure needs to scan a bit more offensively, but his defensive foundation is so solid that at the very, I mean, I'd be very surprised if you're not getting an NHLer out of Brandsegg-Nygård. Is the ceiling higher for Brandsegg-Nygård? I don't think so. I think that they're pretty much neck and neck in terms of offensive quality and upside. With Hemming having the slight edge in terms of goal scoring ability, in my opinion. But at the end of the day, you're looking at two players who have very solid chances of making an NHL roster. But I feel like Brandsegg-Nygård's certainty is going to entice teams a lot more. So, you know, we've seen him in top 15 so far. We've seen him as a pretty much a lock in that position. And I'm a big fan of Brandsegg-Nygård's defensive game and his overall understanding of offensive patterns. He doesn't scan as much, but when he sees things, he sees them very clearly and doesn't need a second glance or second idea. He can execute on his plans really well. So I'm really excited to see how Brandsegg-Nygård develops. I still have my reservations about Hemming, but where do you stand on the two? How do you compare them, and where would they be in a tentative top 32? Would you put Hemming in that first round clearly? I mean, you already know Brandsegg-Nygård is going to be in that conversation, right?
Yeah, I think both of these players are guys that are definitely inside my tentative top 32. I think that Brandsegg-Nygård might be a slight bit higher. I think that his on-puck play is a lot more patient. He uses a lot more of a lateral movement and lane switches and delays in his rushes. Like, he's just a lot more refined than Hemming is.
Yeah.
And there's a reason that he's the one that's already playing pro minutes right now. Whereas Hemming, I think, will get that call-up eventually, but it might take a couple months to get there.
Yeah.
I think Hemming is a guy I have around the 20 to 25 range to start, whereas MBN is probably in that 15 to 20 range, like a slight bit higher. But I have one question for you. Do you see comparisons between Brandsegg-Nygård and Oscar Fisker-Molgaard? Because
That's a good one.
I quite like their defensive games, and I think they're quite similar players in terms of how they bring their value. I think Fisker-Molgaard is more of like that 100% playmaker, and you might get some more goal scoring with MBN. But how would you compare those two players?
Well, Brandsegg-Nygård is defensively has a different foundation, I feel, than Oscar Fisker-Molgaard. Fisker-Molgaard's entire defensive game goes through how smart he is and how able he is to anticipate play. Brandsegg-Nygård outworks opponents. He's still able to outthink them, but he understands that his main tool is his physicality. He understands how to leverage that as well. You see a lot of big guys just run around and, you know, throw their body around and not really think too hard about how to apply the body and when to apply it. Michael Brandsegg-Nygård's foundational ability of being able to outmuscle opponents, get under their sticks, lower his center of gravity. I feel like that works a lot more in his favor than Oscar Fisker-Molgaard's physicality does. I feel like Fisko Molgaard is more of a brainy defender, whereas
Yeah.
whereas Brandsegg-Nygård is really a lot more of the I'm gonna get under your shoulder, I'm gonna drop my weight, I'm gonna hit you square in the chest and separate you from the puck type of defensive player. The stick positioning is pretty much the same though. I feel like stick positioning wise, they both have that foundation of knowing exactly when, where, and how to put their stick on the ice in order to intercept a play. I have that. There are some separations there, but for me, it's very clear that Brandsegg-Nygård is the superior defensive player between him and Emil Hemming,
Oh
which
yeah,
is
that's not very
really kind of
close.
that's the point here is just to see. I mean, for me right now, Brandsegg-Nygård is by far and away the better player of the two, but maybe that'll change as the season goes on. But that wraps things up for our first segment. We're going to go into our second segment where we talk about some Russian prospects and some updates on that side in just a second. But before we go into it, just a quick word from our sponsors. Don't get caught unprepared. Jace Medical offers you everything you need when you suffer an illness. You're going through something difficult in terms of a sinus infection, ear infection, that kind of stuff. If you get caught unprepared in these situations, it can be very harmful for your health. It can limit how much time you can spend at work, getting that bag, all that good stuff. So make sure you stay prepared with Jace Medical. They offer a Jace case, which basically all you do is you go online, you fill out a quick form, and then you get a prescription including 5 life-saving antibiotics in the mail. Sometimes you might just have to hop on a quick call with a licensed professional, but that's about it. They keep it very simple for you. So Jace Medical is offering to help you save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jace Medical, plus another $20 off if you use the code Locked On at checkout on jacemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. Use the code Locked On at checkout, and you'll get $20 off your order. Again, a very helpful and useful situation. I mean, I've been in situations where I've had to miss work, that kind of stuff, and they've been there for me. So check out jacemedical.com, and they'll be able to help you out with everything you need in terms of keeping your physical health up to date. All right, so moving on to our second segment, we'll talk about some Russian prospects, give you some updates on what's going on that side. A listener asked us to give him a couple updates about some of the Russian prospects overseas. We're talking about Alexander Nikishin and a couple more of that range. Let's start with Nikishin. He's been having a fantastic season so far in the KHL, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's a reason that we've already covered him in the last week or two on this podcast. Like, we are
Absolutely.
big fans of Alex Nikishin. This is a very, very intriguing prospect who is really intelligent offensively and has a great toolkit. He's massive, but he's not your classic big defenseman. He's not one to chase hits or to be that like huge physical presence. He's a lot more of a skill-based player, and that is, I think, more on the lines of what we are personally interested in and what we value the most. So we are very big fans of his, and his development has been very, very steady and really impressive. I think like even just comparing the game tape from this season compared to last season, I've seen a pretty significant jump there. I think his development is continuing, and an off season of training is already showing, it's already reaping some benefits there. But yeah, I think Nikishin's awesome. I think that he projects as a number 2 or number 3 defenseman long term, and Carolina got excellent value with that 3rd round draft pick in 2020.
As they usually do. We like Carolina's drafting. Yeah, no, exactly. They always seem to pick up these guys in the mid rounds. But our listener also asked us about Ivan Miroshnichenko, which is a bit weird to me because he just got signed. He's going to be playing with the Hershey Bears this upcoming season. So he's technically not a Russian prospect anymore, but let's talk about him. Put up 4 points in 20-ish games in the KHL. You shouldn't take those points at face value. There's a lot of games where he's 13 forward, doesn't hop on the ice a single time. So, especially with situations like Russian prospects, especially Russian forwards for some reason, tend to have a lot of trouble getting into lineups as prospects. But his MHL tape that I've watched and his VHL tape that I've watched have been really impressive. He's up the ante. He's a lot more pacey now. He's a lot more intense on the puck, capable of making plays laterally and distributing really well. But he's also got a wicked shot. So I'm really excited to see how he does in the AHL against pros full time next year. I feel like that's a great opportunity for Miroshnichenko to work his way up to the to the Capitals lineup. I don't think he's going to play this upcoming year. I think they're going to give him a full year in the AHL, which is really, really smart. But I'm excited to see what happens with him and kind of track his development as he goes on, because he was a player that we were on and off on. He got, I believe, Hodgkin's lymphoma in his draft year, which made things a bit difficult, but he's looking good so far. He's bounced back and has been looking great. He's a great pickup for the Capitals for me. He's a great part of their prospect pool. But our listener also asked us about Gleb Trikozov. Now, I've always been a big fan of Gleb Trikozov, but haven't really gotten the chance to follow him too closely since this draft year. Do you have any takes on him?
Yeah, like I think I've caught like maybe 2 or 3 viewings in the last year of his. I think at least half of those were just in passing, but like, I had one viewing that was like actually zoned in on him, which was fun. And yeah, I mean, like he's definitely still Gleb. He's still the same style of player. He still has a wicked shot. He's still a very strong skater. Still a really potent rush scorer, especially. But I've liked the fact that he's started to layer his handling and his playmaking together a little bit more often, and he's learning how to like pass out of like shooting threatening positions or shoot when he's like kind of showing the passing threat, and kind of using his tools interchangeably, and he's becoming a bit more of a cohesive package. And he was always quite a raw player in his draft year, where it was like, well, the potential here is ridiculously high, and you ranked him accordingly. But it was just, it hadn't fully come together yet. And it still hasn't. It's still a work in progress, and it's still going to take him a couple of years before he cracks the NHL. But he's progressing nicely. He's still certainly Gleb. And yeah, I think especially like the progression in terms of learning to use his tools in tandem with one another to become more dangerous in the offensive zone. That's been the big key area of improvement that I've seen. And I'm happy that he's doubling down on the offensive part of his game with his development, because that's where his value lies in my eyes. I think like he's there are flashes of decent defensive ability, but he's going to crack a top 6 if he can produce as a top 6 winger. And I'm happy that like with his development, the focus has very clearly been on just like, okay, the offense is great, let's make it better. And that is exactly what I wanted to see with him. So yeah, Gleb's doing great.
Gleb's always doing great. I mean, you look at his potential, and do you see that clear pathway to a top 6, or is it still kind of muddy?
It's still a little bit murky for me. I mean, I think I had him ranked in like my like late teens, early 20s, and I'd probably stick with that range of at the moment. I still love the tools. I think he could be a 65-point guy on a second line and be a great depth contributor. But I still think that there's a decent enough chance that he just doesn't crack it at all. And if it just doesn't quite all come together. So yeah, I think if his offense can keep developing at his current pace, and he can keep learning to add tools to his toolkit, then sure, give it 3 years and he'll be a top 6 winger. But it's usually like you see more of a curve in development, right? Where it's not exactly linear. But no, I still think he projects as a really good prospect, and especially as a 3rd round or like late 2nd round draft pick. You cannot go wrong with Gleb. But yeah, I'd still say it's a little bit murky in terms of the overall projection.
Makes sense for sure. I'm a bit of the same mind. Like I said, I haven't watched him too much, but based on what I've heard and the production overall, it's looking that like there's some slight progression, but nothing to write home about. Speaking of which, we've got Alexander Nikishin, who we were asked about as well. Based on what I've seen, went through 2 MHL teams with sub a point per game in each one, and then got a loan to Kunlun Red Star, which is not always good for a prospect's career. Playing in China led him to earn 4 points in 27 games, or something around that range, which is, if you're playing on Kunlun Red Star as a top prospect, you're looking for more than that. But yeah,
he probably scored points on half the goals they scored in that span.
That is true. That is fair. You can create your own, is what I'm saying. But yeah, no, I mean, there's nothing really to write home about yet with Paravalov. It's been kind of an off season for him. He's got an opportunity to bounce back this year. He's playing in the VHL, which is a better opportunity for him. So we'll see how things goes. But I'll keep a close eye on Paravalov and get some more viewings in him, and especially his VHL tape, because his skill set in his draft year was impressive. I was fairly impressed with that. It's just a matter of seeing how that kind of plays out for him and how that evolves, because he's a fairly set in his ways, kind of junior scorer type of player. But I'm interested to see how his defensive game develops, how he starts to leverage his frame, that kind of stuff. We'll see how that develops. But that wraps things up for our Russian prospects update in our second segment. Now we'll talk about the game on the line in our third segment and kind of get into our starting six for the 2021 NHL Draft, picking a player from a different round for each position. Before we get into that, Sebastian, talk us through our sponsor for today's episode.
Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed, when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose, that you can use on anything, ranging from spreads to player props to over and unders and far more. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
All right, so moving on to our final segment, we're going to do our game on the line segment for the 2021 NHL Draft. Now, we've got a lot of options for this draft. It was a bit of a difficult one. We ended up with very different lineups, except for the left-handed D position, which is a pretty obvious one, if you ask me. So, Sebastian, let's start with your lineup. Who do you have as your front three at forward?
Well, I'll start off with Carter Mazur, who was a third-round draft pick for the Detroit Red Wings, and a little bit of a surprising pick at the time, because this was an overager who didn't even score a point a game in the USHL that season, but he followed that up with 2 consecutive seasons at the University of Denver, where he was almost at a point a game in each year, and he scored 6 points in 6 AHL games last season. And this is a player who might even crack the Red Wings roster this year, and overall projects as a really, really versatile and decent goal-scoring depth option, maybe on a third line, with the upside of potential second line upside. And adding to that, I've got Joshua Roy, who brings a similar level of that grit, the intensity, the work rate. And this is a player whose game is defined by the combination of his intelligence and his engagement. He has really developed a ton since the Habs drafted him in the 5th round of the 2021 draft. And he's shown at 2 consecutive World Junior Championships, played with Connor Bedard, and they were great together. This is a player that I'll be having at center, even though he likely will end up as a winger at the end of the day. I just couldn't I couldn't ignore the option of picking him in the 5th round here. And I also picked Jackson Blake as my right winger, who was my 4th round draft pick. He was picked by the Carolina Hurricanes, and this is an undersized skill winger who is going to be the playmaking fulcrum of my forward line. And he is a ton of fun, one of the most fun players in this draft class. And I had to pick him. I needed to do it for myself, and I'm quite happy with my forward line. It's not the most superstar line of all time, but I kept that for my defensive core. But what about your forward core? What have you got up front?
I went a different route. I have my main skill guy in Sasha Pastujov, who's a 3rd round pick of the Anaheim Ducks. That was my 3rd round selection from that draft year, and I've put him down as center. He's a fantastically skillful player with equal parts of playmaking and goal scoring ability. I think the hands really stand out with Pastujov. He's going to be the main kind of focal point of that offensive core. To his left, I put Xavier Simoneau, as you know, who's one of my favorite NHL prospects. Simoneau is a twice overage player who was picked in the 6th round by the Montreal Canadiens. And I've been banging his drum since 2018, 2019, when it was his draft year, that he should have been drafted. And it took 2 years for him to get drafted. It took 2 years of me singing his praise and making sure that everyone knows who I'm talking about here. He's basically become my beacon on Twitter. Anytime he's mentioned, I get tagged. And Simoneau is the hardest working 5'6" player you'll ever see in your life. He's built like a tree stump. He can outwork players. He can get under their skin. I've seen him go into board battles against literal 6'7" centers and win battles. against them in the AHL. So he's been looking really good. I think that he's going to offer a lot of that forechecking element to that line. And then I'm just adding pure skill as well with Dmitry Rashevsky, who was a 5th-round pick of the Winnipeg Jets. And he has been looking fantastic since getting drafted. He's had great numbers in the KHL. He's up to 8 points in 8 games so far in the KHL this year. He's a guy who wasn't on everyone's radar, but when he was picked, I was like, no surprise there. He's a very skillful player. Fantastic hands, great shot, great playmaking. So him and Pastujov are going to be doing most of the offensive carrying. Simoneau is still a very potent playmaker, but his role on that line is going to be mainly to man the forecheck, win pucks back for those guys, and feeding them in dangerous areas, which I think is a great combination of skills. But talk me through your defense core, because we went a different route. We have the same left-handed, we have the same left defenseman, but our right D is different. So talk me through that.
Very different right Ds. Yeah, I went with Olen Zellweger, as did you, for left shot defense, which I think was a pretty straightforward pick in the second round. The only other player I considered there was Logan Stankoven, but I was pretty happy with the options of like Jackson Blake and Carter Mazur as my wingers. So I felt very, very happy to just add Olen Zellweger to the mix. This is one of the most talented defensemen yet to play an NHL game, and he was picked in the early second by the Anaheim Ducks, and could be their first power play quarterback by the end of this year. So very happy to have him. And I doubled down on offense with my defensemen. So the other player I have there is Owen Power, the first overall pick of the draft class, who I underrated at the time, but making up for lost time now. And very happy to just have him in there. This is a player who is tremendously gifted offensively, really intelligent. He's learned to manage pressure extremely well. And the defensive game has been taking strides in the last couple of seasons too. So I am very happy with Owen Power being like the star of my team, and Olen Zellweger really isn't that far behind. So I'm very happy with my defensive pairing here.
Absolutely. I went a different route with my right D, mainly just because I wanted to keep my first round pick for the goaltender position. I went with Ethan Del Mastro, who was picked by the Chicago Blackhawks in the 4th round. Del Mastro is a very good defensive player. He mans the defensive zone really well. I'm not as impressed with his abilities going forward. I feel like his offensive decision making isn't all there. He doesn't have the best hands. He's a fairly decently sized defensive defenseman, which I feel is going to be a great complement to Olen Zellweger. That's why I went that route. But I kept my first round pick to get Jesper Wallstedt of the Minnesota Wild. In net, I feel like, the old adage, goaltenders win you cups. And I feel like Wallstedt is easily a top 2, top 3, maybe even the best goaltender prospect in the NHL. As much as I like Dustin Wolf and Devin Levi, Jesper Wallstedt is Jesper Wallstedt. He can do some fantastic things in goal, and I feel like I can feel safe knowing that I have Wallstedt and Ethan Del Mastro to kind of man the bottom half of the ice, and you can just let Olen Zellweger, Sasha Pastujov, Dmitry Rashevsky, and Xavier Simoneau just wreak havoc in the offensive half of it. So that's that's my reasoning for that. But you went with a 6th round pick in goal. Tell me about Semyon Vyachevoy.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have too much selection here. I knew I wasn't going to spend my first rounder on my goalie, and that did not give me too many options in this draft class. But Semyon Vyachevoy is very impressive in terms of the pure numbers. I've watched a little bit of him, and I have a few more like scouting concerns than I do with like NHLE concerns with Vyachevoy. I think he can be a bit chaotic in net, but in his 19-year-old season, he put up a 920 in like 25 VHL games against professional competition, which is really good. And and Russian goalies are often very, very good. So I just, for a 6th round pick, I'm more than happy with that. I think there is some upside there. Do I win the goaltending battle? No. Do I win the skater battle? I think I do. And I think that's what makes the difference for my team here.
I think you win the defense pair. I'm not sure about the offensive core. Listen, give Dmitry Reshevsky a chance in the offensive zone. He'll bury it. I promise you. So yeah, no, I'm really excited about my offensive line. But listen, we'll probably never see this happen, so we can't really get a concrete answer. This is just on paper. Connor Mazer, Joshua One, and Jackson Blake is a fantastic line, though. I will give you that.
I'm very happy with it. I mean, look, like Joshua One, Reshevsky, I think are two slightly comparable players. I'll give you that. Look, I still like Carter Mazer a little bit more than Sasha Pastujov. I've watched a lot of Pastujov, and the skill is obvious, but he's a junior scorer, and I have a lot of concerns in terms of like translating that to the professional game, which is why I went with Carter Mazer, who I think is a lot more consistent, a lot more reliable, and also has a pretty wicked shot. So I'm quite happy with my mix here, but I could also rely on Zellweger and Power to score me some goals. So like there's a reason I went with two offensive defensemen to kind of complement the more rugged like forward line, though Jackson Blake doesn't exactly fall into that category. He's just
makes
fun.
sense,
But
for sure.
Yeah, I'm very happy with my lineup too.
Makes sense for sure. But that wraps things up for today's episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe, leave us a comment. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today, and make sure you tune in for our next episode on Friday as we break down another game of the line NHL Draft lineup. This has been Hadi Kalakesh with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.